Pressure mounts on National Assembly over electoral law changes as protests intensify. Public debate over Nigeria's electoral reforms has deepened following the National Assembly's passage of an amendment to the Electoral Act that critics say could weaken transparency in future elections. On February 4th, 2025, the Senate approved changes reducing the timeline for the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) to publish notice of election results from 360 days to 180 days. More controversially, lawmakers rejected provisions for mandatory real-time electronic transmission of results, a measure widely credited with improving transparency during recent elections. The amendment, which must be harmonized with the vision earlier passed by the House of Representatives before presidential assent, has triggered widespread concern among civil society groups, political leaders, and youth activists. Demonstrations have been held for several days outside the National Assembly complex in Abuja, with protesters demanding the restoration of compulsory electronic transmission.
INEC conducts conclave election for the Pope. I cannot be deceived because that is what they do with Nigerians.
Platform of Nigerian citizens. Yeah. You have movement for credible election here. You have revolution now. You have market movement. The important thing is that we are all Nigerians.
Many demonstrators have directed their criticism at Senate leadership, particularly Senate President Godswill Akpabio, whom some accuse of overseeing a process that diluted earlier provisions adopted by the House of Representatives. Senate officials have not publicly responded in detail to the allegation, but insist that legislative procedures were followed. Political figures joined the protests. Opposition figures and public commentators have amplified the growing resistance.
Even when you are a visitor from another country, you have access to the Capitol Hall. Why can't we get into our own National Assembly without being separated by the police from so-called elected representatives of the people? We want to be part of the gallery where the emergency meeting is holding, so that we can make sure and monitor. Yes.
On 9 February, Peter Obi, the Labour Party's presidential candidate in the 2023 election, led a group of supporters to the National Assembly in protest against the Senate's decision. A former Rivers State governor and ex-minister of transportation, Rotimi Amechi, joined the demonstrators also in Abuja, calling for the clause to be reinstated. Other public figures, including former Education Minister Obe Ezekwesili, have used her media platforms to urge lawmakers to revise course, warning that the decision could roll back gains made in electoral transparency over the past decade.
The Senate had its own conclusions on. If you've been following developments since the Senate had its own conclusions on the election, following that of the House of Reps that agreed with a reform to the clause in the current electoral bill, the INEC Bill 2022 as amended, on the matter of electoral transmission of results electronically from the polling unit into the IREV as a clause that was considered not to be a mandatory provision in the 2023 election, because it was considered as one that was open to the discretion of the Independent Electoral Commission. You will know that the citizens came to the conclusion that the Senate is acting contrary to the desire of Nigerians for electoral transparency that will strengthen our democracy.
Concerns over transparency and trust. The central issue in dispute is whether INEC should be legally required to transmit election results electronically in real time from polling units. Advocates say the provision reduces opportunities for manipulation, speeds up coalition, and improves public trust. Critics of the Senate position argue that removing the requirement introduces ambiguity that could be exploited during elections. They also warn that shortening the notice period for election results without strengthening transmission safeguards could further erode transparency.
You are a madman! For shooting that tear gas, you are a madman! We are fighting so that you are shooting!
Divided in 2 wards, and within each ward you have the polling units, and we have total of 176,000 polling units across the country, and out of that is only 3,000 that is not really covered in the set. And I say that they can provide, routers, partner with, telecommunication companies to give up those areas. If we can have givers across every area that is working, and we have backups, so we can also have that to back up the area. So infrastructure, network infrastructure is no longer an excuse.
However, some lawmakers have defended the amendment, citing logistical technical challenges experienced during previous elections. They argue that making electronic transmission mandatory in all circumstances could expose the process to disruptions, particularly in areas with weak network infrastructure. Now, the protests signal a broader struggle over Nigeria's democratic trajectory, one in which technology, trust, and institutional accountability remain central concerns. As demonstrations continue in Abuja, many Nigerians will be watching closely to see whether their lawmakers respond to calls for greater transparency or proceed with a version of the law that critics say weakens electoral safeguards.